Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Tuesday Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone had a great weekend. We're going to start off this with something that we started a few weeks ago, but we skipped a couple sessions. I'm going to have my producer, Shanna Gonzalez, ask me a couple questions that a couple of our listeners submitted recently. Go ahead, Shanna.
Hello, Marty. We have a question from one of our listeners. In your opinion, what are the factors that most affect the real estate market? I am thinking of purchasing and would like some general guidelines and information about what I should factor in.
Okay, that's a great question. That'll be a little lengthy answer, so give me the second question too so I can cover both after I finish the first one.
Okay, the second question is, I enjoy your podcast, but wonder why you are fixed in issues outside the focus of real estate, such as your discussion mentioning Robert F. Kennedy's incompetence.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. All right, well, let me address the first question that we had, which was from a prospective buyer. What are the factors that most affect the real estate market? This listener was thinking of purchasing and was hoping to get some general guidelines and information from me about what factors that she should consider. Well, as I mentioned, that's a pretty comprehensive question, but it's a great question. It's always good when you're thinking of getting into real estate, whether you're thinking of buying or selling, to have given a little thought to the components that are going to be most important to you. And then when you chat with someone like myself, a professional in the business, it's easier for us to put together the best blueprint for you. So to start off with your question, number one is, what are your reasons for purchasing now? With a lot of people, especially that are first-time purchasers, it's because they want to get out of the rental yo-yo where you're kind of at the whim and caprice of landlords. And what I mean by that is landlords all have different objectives, different priorities. But the thing is, when you're the tenant, you have no way to control from year to year two things. Number one, is the landlord going to raise your rent? And if so, by how much? And number two, is the landlord going to renew your lease or not? Because maybe the landlord is thinking of selling the property. Maybe he has a friend or relative that he'd rather rent to. So you just never know. So you don't have control. And especially if you're a person that has a child or children, you're having to disrupt the children's routine. And it's always good to give the children, if you're in the position to, more roots. So that's obviously one thing that, you should think about. Secondly, obviously, with your realtor's input, when you get to the point of talking with a professional, what's your budget? And the budget can be on one of two factors. Factor number one is what a lender feels could be approved for. So, for example, let's say the lender, based on your income and debts and your credit history, says, well, you can purchase up to $500,000 purchase with putting down, let's say, 10% or $50,000. And I'm just giving you a general guideline there. So let's say that's the person's criteria. And let's just say, for discussion purposes, when they break the math down for that type of purchase, like a $500,000 purchase with a $50,000 down payment, so they'd have a mortgage of $450,000. So let's say between computing the mortgage, factoring in the taxes, factoring in the homeowner's insurance, and factoring in the homeowners association fees, let's say that monthly amount for that particular customer would be $4,000. And so the customer's told that, but then when I chat with the customer and we go over what the lender could approve them for, they say, well, I don't want to spend $4,000 a month. I don't want to be, and you'll hear this term periodically from people, I don't want to be house poor. I always want to live a little bit below my means. And so I can never argue with that type of logic. For a lot of people, that peace of mind that if something goes a little bit sideways, you've got a financial cushion makes perfect sense to me. So if the lender would approve that purchaser for a $500,000 purchase with a $4,000 payment, and the customer only wants to have a $3,500 payment, obviously we would need to rework their math to get down to that $3,500 level. So let's just say hypothetically, to get to that level, that they'd have to reduce their purchase to $435. And so that would greatly help me, because now I know that for that particular customer, they're going to be a lot more comfortable with a $435 purchase. Now, obviously, certain things can be tweaked in that. For example, we're using a general amount of money for taxes, and we're using a general amount of money for homeowners insurance. So those things can change slightly depending on the age of the home, depending on the tax history of the home, things of that nature. But it gives me a good framework to follow. So that's an important thing for a prospective customer to factor in. Some other things that the customer needs to give consideration to is, again, if they have children, what ages are the children? Are they going to go to public schools? And if they're going to public schools, their opinion on which school systems they would like to be in. And obviously, schools are somewhat subjective. The only thing we can do as realtors is we can direct them to the county and statewide websites that show the standardized test scores for particular schools, what they call the FCAT scores in Florida. They're not a guarantee that one school is going to be superior to another, but that's the framework that we are able to use. The other thing that I sometimes tell people when they're doing school research is, talk to friends or neighbors that have sent kids to different schools that you're friendly with. Maybe go to the schools beforehand and interview the principals. There's things that you can do to prepare. Obviously, schooling is an important factor for a lot of parents. So it's good to do your due diligence before you ever start looking at homes. So you have a plan A for schools, and then if for some reason you can't find a house that meets your criteria or is not affordable in that school district, then hopefully you have a plan B. But that's an important factor. Some other things that you can look at is, well, what's the forecast for the real estate market, for the economy, and for interest rates? For example, I mentioned on Friday's podcast that we're expecting interest rates to go down a little bit in this fourth quarter. So that's a good thing. And for some people, because the fourth quarter is going to start in less than 4 weeks, there's no reason that they wouldn't wait for 4 weeks. But the nice thing is, you don't really have to wait for 4 weeks, because it's going to take you some time to find a house. And then you just don't lock in your interest rate until we get that next rate decrease that we're thinking of. And then if we don't get that rate decrease for whatever reason, you're not really losing out. You're just not getting as good a rate as you had hoped for. So that's important. Also, trends. For example, what's the economic forecast? Right now, there's mixed reviews on our economy. Like, they just came out with a jobs report saying the jobs report was a little bit disappointing, and it is a concern, because obviously if the unemployment rate is higher than normal, that affects the entire economy. But from a buyer standpoint, regarding unemployment, you would have two factors to consider. If your job is solid, you don't really have to worry about that, so that's not a factor for you. Now, what is a little bit of a factor, if it looks like the economy is going to go into a little bit of a negative direction, which hopefully it won't, but let's say it looks that way, you might wait for a short period of time to see if that takes place, because if the economy goes a little bit south, it's possible that real estate prices could go a little bit south. On the flip side of that, if it looks like we have too much inflation, then prices could start to go up, and then it would be a time game for you, so that you'd want to buy as soon as you can before prices go up anymore. So timing's also a crucial element. Many times, timings don't dramatically affect your decision because the change may be gradual. But these are all things that you should study a little bit and talk to your agent when you're chatting with the agent. And I can go into some more details with that, but from a big picture standpoint, those are some of the criteria that you should consider. The biggest thing is you want to give thought to this before you start looking at homes. Then you want to take your agent's suggestions to heart if you're comfortable with what that agent has to offer, so that you have an organized blueprint. Because with something such as real estate, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of variables, and the more focused and targeted you can be, the more successful your journey into finding the right house for you and your family. So I hope that helped a little bit. And if you'd like a more detailed explanation, feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to chat with you on the phone or meet you in person if that's more convenient for you. I can be reached at 407-595-9700, and my email address is marty@floridasells.com. For the second question that another listener asked, they asked the following: I enjoy your podcast, but wonder why you mix in issues outside the focus of real estate, such as your discussion mentioning Robert F. Kennedy's incompetence. Well, that's a nuanced question, and I'm sure if you talk to a bunch of different individuals and said, hey, do you listen to Marty Kaiser's real estate podcast? What'd you think of his discussion and opinions about Robert F. Kennedy? And probably you would get the following reactions. Some people would say it's interesting. I appreciate Marty voicing his opinions on these important topics, because they're not topics that directly benefit Marty, but he feels it's important to share his opinions with the listeners. On the other hand, you might get other listeners that say, Marty needs to keep his opinions to himself and talk about real estate. This is a real estate show, and I don't really, my time is valuable, and I don't want to hear his opinions about politics, the competence of our cabinet members, etc. Another set of listeners might say, I appreciate Marty's willingness to tackle topics that may be considered controversial, where there's certainly going to be a difference of opinion, because he's not doing that to benefit his personal business. He's doing it to discuss things that he feels are important. So those are some different reactions that I've gotten from people that I know that listen to my podcast. They're usually friends or acquaintances of mine as opposed to strangers. I haven't talked directly to people that have listened to my podcast that I don't know, because unless they've sent me feedback on the show, I don't know their feelings. And quite honestly, I haven't really gotten any negative feedback via email or somebody calling me to complain about the information that I put out there. to answer this listener's question, I feel strongly about certain things, as you've probably gathered from listening to me. So when I feel strongly about it, I share the information. Why do I share it? Because I think there is not enough opinions that are what I would call somewhat factual based shared in media, because a lot of people that do podcasts are doing it because they want to get business in their field. And so they know that if they share things that may have differing opinions, it may not benefit their business. Secondarily, a lot of people nowadays, they just don't want to share opinions. They try to take the smoother way out, and they're mainly interested in boosting their listenership. And so one of the gambles when you talk about controversial things, you might get listeners that stop listening. And so that would affect, quote unquote, your analytics or your ratings and such. Now, myself, obviously, I would love every single person in the world to listen to my podcast, but I don't do the podcast with the intention of getting direct monetary benefit from it. I don't seek out or sell advertising space. Not that people would advertise on here if I did that, but I don't seek that out. I do the podcast for a few reasons. Number one, I enjoy talking about real estate. Number two, I enjoy sharing my opinions. Number three, I like to talk. And there's no better way to talk than a podcast like this, where I can talk about topics that I want to talk about. You know, if I go out in the general community, I may not be able to talk about some of these topics, because if I'm going out to dinner with friends or neighbors, a lot of times you don't want to bring up things that there might be a disagreement about, so it might put a negative cast on the evening out. Secondarily, it's hard with a lot of people nowadays to really talk about things of substance. People just shy away from that. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't really stay apprised to probably the degree I do on some of these topics. You know, people look at internet clicks and things, and there's just a lot of untrue information that goes out online. You know, and I'll inject one thing, like in the last few days, we've had a lot of discussion about Florida and their healthcare policies. Joseph Lodopo, I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is in charge. I don't know if they call it Health and Human Services in Florida, but in terms of, I think he maybe is the Inspector General for Florida. So he was someone that was somewhat controversial that Governor DeSantis appointed, I guess, in the last 2 years. And he's got a very checkered history. When you actually, he did not get recommended from the university he taught at. He's got very extreme anti-vaccine positions, which in my opinion is very dangerous for somebody that's running the healthcare policy for a state. Just like I mentioned, Robert Kennedy is kind of the same cloth as Lodopo, but he's running the whole country. The benefit Lodopo has is he's working for a governor that loves this. So he's right in lockstep with the governor, and so the more that they can be anti on this particular concept, they're thrilled with that. So he's got unfettered approval from Governor DeSantis. The trouble with this gentleman is, and he finally admitted it this week, he's not done any research on this. He has no facts. He just kind of shoots from the hip. You know, that would be like me going on a real estate appointment and someone says, "Hey, Marty, I want to sell my house and I want you to be the guy. What do you think I should price the house at?" So I come up with a price. They say, "Well, what did you base that opinion on, Marty?" "Well, you know, I just think that's the right price. I feel strongly that, you know, I have dreams at night and God tells me what to price homes at. So I feel you should price your home at that level. Well, I don't think too many potential sellers would hire me with that type of mindset and lack of factual data. And this Lodopo guy feels that vaccines can be harmful to you or they're given unnecessarily. But he really doesn't have facts to back it up. You know, the only things you can say about vaccines of a factual nature, now you can argue about what the facts are, but the concepts. You can say that hopefully most of the vaccines that we're familiar with dramatically reduce the amount of people getting those diseases, if any, and they reduce people dying from the things. At the same time, like anything that you take in life, they're not 100%. So there are going to be people that get ill effects from vaccines, and possibly somebody theoretically could die or it could cause other issues. But the ratio of how many people are saved from either getting the disease or dying way exceeds the amount of people that get the ill effects. And there's never been any studies on any of these things that are distributed in the masses to refute what I'm telling you. So when it comes to the COVID vaccine and they're saying they don't like mandates, you shouldn't have to take those in certain circumstances, that's not a state decision. That should be an individual household decision. I agree with that with certain cautionary discussions. And what I mean by that, like right now, we don't have a pandemic to the degree we had 4 or 5 years ago. So I can see if a parent feels strongly and doesn't want to have their child vaccinated as a preventative measure, that's their right and privilege. So I might not agree with that position 100%, but I certainly understand it and wouldn't quibble about it. However, when we had the COVID pandemic, we had over 1 million people that died from the disease. And so at that time, if you wanted to send your kid into a public environment such as schools, there was no reason why it's unreasonable to expect you to have your child vaccinated. If you felt that strongly that the vaccination was not the right thing for you and your family, then I think you should have been limited to homeschooling your child. Because it's not fair, because of your personal beliefs, to expose a bunch of people to basically have the possibility of contracting the COVID disease. And the COVID disease was very contagious. You can't argue that. And think about people that you know and read about that have long haulers, COVID. In other words, they got COVID and they theoretically got over the worst of it, but they have all these additional symptoms that run the gamut of things, from lack of smell, lack of taste, to other health issues that they have. And there's a lot of people that have that. I know one of the arguments against the COVID vaccine is, well, we don't know the long-term effects from the vaccine. Well, they did a bunch of research, so I don't know if that's a true statement. But let's say that is a true statement, that we don't know all the long-term effects from the vaccine. We certainly don't know all the long-term effects from having COVID, scarring of your lungs and having all these different things that could affect your health as you get older, may affect your lifespan, et cetera. I know myself, and you can tell from talking with me, that I'm more of an advocate for my own health. I exercise, I watch what I eat. I pretty much take most of the vaccines when they're available to me. I still got COVID, and I know to this day that I cough a lot more. You've heard on a couple of my telecasts here that you hear me coughing. Some of that could be just a cold, but I know I cough more normally than I ever did before I had COVID. So I don't know if that's I haven't had any x-rays to the point where they're a concern from a doctor's standpoint, but I must have had some kind of impact on my lungs because you just don't cough for any reason. So I bring up these topics when I feel they need to be brought up, and I'm sure, you're going to hear more of these from me, and I just feel strongly about them. Hopefully you'll take them for what they're intended for. I think it's healthy to have discussions. It's fine for people to disagree, but I always respect people's disagreements more if they have some factual data to back up their disagreement. If they just come out with, well, I don't believe in them, well, why don't you believe in them? Well, they can't really give you an answer, then I don't put as much trust in that person's opinion of the thing. So that's me. I know my wife sometimes thinks I'm opinionated, and, we don't agree on everything, obviously. My wife is a more easygoing person than me. Sometimes opposites attract. It would be boring if you and your mate agreed on every single topic. So that's me in a nutshell. I hope that answered our listeners' questions. Feel free, if you have more questions, to continue the emails to marty@floridasells.com. And if you have any real estate related questions or you'd like some future help, please contact me at 407-595-9700. That's all for today. Have a great week. This is Marty Kaiser out.